That's one thing that Kate did mention, that she was having a hard time hearing you, Sean, so speaking to the mics. This is just a test for everybody that's on the group. Can you all see the screen? Hear everybody?
Yes, I can hear you, and we can see the team's, circles being shared currently.
Great. Okay, well, crisis averted. That was a little bit worrisome at first. So, Mayor, Town Committee, thank you very much for opportunity to meet with you again. I know it's been a few weeks since we last met, but rest assured we've been working very, very hard, and we have a lot of great information to share with you today. For our agenda, I'm going to start off by giving you all an update on the progress that we've been making since our February meeting, as well as percent complete on all of our major tasks up to this point. And then Kate is going to go into a presentation regarding the 2023 existing and the 2045 no build conditions related to our VISM findings. If you recall, during the February meeting, we had the 2023 completed, but we felt there was much more benefit in bringing the 2045 no builds to you on the same day so that you can see what's occurring today in VISM and then what's projected in 2045 if there's no improvements made along the corridor. And then that kind of leads very naturally into Kate then unveiling the 4 recommended alternatives that we're going to be sharing with you all for consideration to the committee and ultimately the town council. So as I said, we've been very busy over the last 6 weeks, and I will not go through every bit of text on that slide. Really, the major component was getting through the 2045 no build VISM modeling and understand what the levels of service were from our VISM model. And then from there, that served as the base point in helping us determine which alternatives best mitigated the deficiencies shown for the 2045 model. We've come up with 4 alternatives. There's no ranking order with those. They're just labeled sequentially. We have traffic operations and findings ready for you today to discuss. However, alternative number 4 is a little bit more complex, and we're working on that. The goal is to bring forth the traffic operating conditions for alternative 4 at the upcoming committee meeting on the 10th. And also bring the roadway, right-of-way environmental impacts, and we're going to have a matrix prepared that shows how they grade against one another underneath the criteria set forth in the matrix. Now I want to give you an overall project progress update, and then in terms of like a per task. So overall, I feel that as of March 22nd, when we submitted the slide deck to Sean to ultimately provide to the committee, we're probably about almost 50% of the way there overall, all the way through task 5. And just as a reminder to the group, when I refer to tasks 1 through 5, that's relating to the scope of services addendum that we prepared. I worked closely with Sean, you all saw, approved by council. It's taking the information that is within the town approved RFQ, but just reformatting it a bit to walk through chronologically how we were going to complete the project. And so in task 1, that was the front end work, initiation and coordination. That's where things like the site visit was completed. So we've been able to complete a substantial amount of that. There are items that will remain throughout the rest of the project, such as meetings. We're going to continue to meet with you all. We're going to continue to, as we begin preparing detailed reports and memos, we're going to harken back to previously completed reports if we need to reference a certain item. And then there's some brief technical memorandums and opinions of probable costs that really are in parallel. There's nothing that's there that's precluding what we're doing moving forward. Task number 2, that was a review of the existing operating conditions and the travel demand model. The results of task number 2 were brought forth at the February 14th meeting. That's where we outlined the operating conditions, and then that's when Sharif shared our recommended background growth rate. And since that is completed, we would consider task 2 100% complete. Task 3 is looking at what we call the modified original project study area. And that is considering the intersections within Bluffton at Moss Creek and Buckingham Plantation, across US 278 Bridge, onto the island and then past Cross Island Parkway to Gumtree Road. As you all know, the Department of Transportation study didn't include those bookended intersections, and we're doing that right now. We decided to move this corridor up to the front of our evaluation so you all would understand what we recommend needed to be done on that corridor. And in terms of percent complete, that may seem quite low. That was as of March 22nd. But as I said, some of the major items that we are going to bring forth on March 10th would be there's a substantial amount of environmental reviews that we're going to have completed by then, the right-of-way evaluations, and high opinions of probable cost.
You said March 10th, and that's April 10th.
I'm sorry, April 10th. Apologize for that. That shares what we're continuing to work on. I kind of alluded to that in the beginning. And then the key subtasks forthcoming. The ultimate deliverable for task number 3 would be the summary of findings memo with accompanying exhibits that outlines everything that we've done to date to get to this point through task 3. And then also to Sean, when we were preparing the scope, asked us to budget for if desired, to have participation in a public open house with the community, particularly the Stony community, that would be led by Sean's staff as well as their planning consultant. And I don't have any slides for the next two tasks. They haven't been completed yet or started because task 3 needs to be complete before we move on to task 4, because as I said, task 3 is to get that alignment from Moss Creek through to Gumtree Road, and then off of that, that's when we'll begin evaluating all the downstream intersections from there. That would be task 4, and then running a VISM model of all the intersections collectively. And then task 5 is simply just the summation of everything, the formal traffic safety and operations report, and then the ultimate presentation to the council. That is an update on where we stand, what's been completed since our last meeting. Before I hand it over to Kate, I did just want to offer, if anybody had any questions, what I've covered so far.
Any questions from the committee?
Back. So when you look at the travel demand model, I think any which way we play it, the traffic over the Cross Island will increase, and it will have, I mean, it's almost the floodgates going open onto Seapine Circle. So are you planning to get solutions for Seapine Circle?
As a part of task 4, yes.
Where does that stand at the moment? Have you started that, or is that?
No, as I mentioned before, we need to get task 3 completed with understanding what a corridor and alignment is, because what's affected here determines the throughput. Yes, that's a substantial distance, but we've been waiting to move anything with those intersections. We understand what the 2045 no-build and synchros are, but we haven't done anything in VISM with these intersections to mitigate any deficiencies that are there right now. Kate, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to begin speaking about the 2023 existing VISM results.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Very well.
Okay. So as Nate mentioned, I will first walk through some of our existing and no-build VISM results. We can have a discussion about our finalized findings. Many of the numbers, well, all the numbers on this slide really will not be new to this committee. These are what we presented in our prior meeting as preliminary, and then as we have stepped through and finalized the existing and no-build VISM models, some small tweaks, we are comfortable calling these final now. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'll keep going though. So the main thing I want you guys to get from this slide is that let's pay attention to the percent differences, which are the 2 columns towards the end of the table here. Again, this is the same table that we presented to you at our prior meeting, and the point in showing this, we look at our observed travel time in seconds and then the simulated travel time in seconds from our VISM model. The observed travel times were what we collected during our site visits, so that's real actual data. And our targets to consider the model successfully calibrated are the percent difference between those two values, all less than 10%. So as you can see in the last two columns of this table, we are within that 10% threshold for our existing results, and therefore we consider the results valid, and we believe we have a very well calibrated model, a good solid baseline to step into our future no build analysis and ultimately provide solid recommendations for the 4 alternatives as to what could potentially help the corridor in the future. You can go to the next slide, Nate. Trend, okay. Again, this is another existing results table, but volumes this time. So prior was travel time results. This is our existing volume results. Volume is the the number of vehicles generally at a specific point in the system, the point denoted by the location on the left hand of the slide. So again, let's pay attention to the columns on the far right hand of the table. All of the percent differences are within 10%. Therefore, we are, again, comfortable that, with the seconds and the volume, both those differentials both resting within our 10% threshold, we're confident in the results of our existing conditions model. So on the next slide, we will show a few speed maps, AM first, followed by PM. So the speed maps are not necessarily like the posted speed limit of the roadway, right? These speed maps are generally how fast does traffic are vehicles able to flow through the network. And the colors that you'll see, it is zoomed up to be very high level, but the colors should still show through. The areas that are yellow to orange to red are congested to more severely congested, potentially standstill conditions at times where those red areas are. Green are areas where generally for most of the peak hour of the model it was flowing reasonably well. There may have been a few blips here or there, but on an average we can get an idea of how the corridor is performing from these maps. Another thing I wanted to note out quickly before we proceed, there have been a few comments previously about the volumes that we're using in the study and how we should not focus on ADT alone. We should also focus on the peak hour factor, the peak hour volumes for both the AM and the PM, and understand how the system works at your most congested points, which would be the commuter peaks, as well as the entire day. So, I want to clarify that our models that we build, our VISIM models, are based on hourly volume data, both the AM and the PM, and we also use ADT values in a higher level general capacity to talk about roadway characteristics. But please rest assured that our models are based on hourly data, and the specific hourly volumes for any movement in question is found in the appendix of this presentation. If anybody is curious to go, look through that, and if you have any questions about the volumes in the AM or PM peak period for very specific intersections, we have that data available. It's in the appendix of this presentation, and I would, if we have questions about that, I would call on my colleague who's also part of this meeting, Michelle Roma, and she can look that up for us quickly. So that information is available to us too as part of our discussion. So back to the speed maps. Generally what I'm seeing, what I take away from this map for AM, is that we really have our main pinch point originating from the bridge. We can see the existing bridge, the existing 4-lane bridge on 278. You can see that most of our red in the longest, the longest sections originate from mainland traffic trying to come onto the island in the morning, which is consistent with the commuter peaks that we have in this area and consistent with the delay that we observed during our peak hour observations, and of course still holds true with the the experiences that you folks have living in this area. You can also notice that the intersections, the at-grade intersections, will pop red. The corridors between the intersections will fluctuate various different colors, but it's pretty true across the corridor that our signalized intersections have a lot of congestion, and there is a lot of traffic trying to flow through one bottleneck point, and we can see that reflected in the speed maps here. If we flip to the PM speed map, we'll see much of the same, although flip-flopped, right? So whereas in our AM peak hour, commuting. People are mainly coming from the mainland across the bridge onto the island. It flips in the PM. People who come to the island to work or for leisure, perhaps return home to the mainland in PM. And so we will see much of that congestion centered around the Cross Island Parkway interchange with 278, Spanish Wells, Gumtree. All of this is data that presented itself through our other analysis and all of our peak hour metric tables for the existing conditions. And it again, tells the same story when we look at the speed maps for the corridor. So if we continue on to the next slide, we also are able to produce videos of our VISM models, which is a really neat tool, interactive, that brings the analysis to life, so to speak, helps visualize things more. So Nate's going to go ahead and play this existing VISM model. This is from the AM peak hour, and so the point of this illustration is really to bring to life the model and hopefully let you guys visually see kind of how the calibration played out in real life. And our goal was to capture some of the congestion in the various areas throughout the corridor. We don't have the entire corridor shot on this one video snip, but we were hoping to really just illustrate the most congested points along the corridor and give you a general visual of what we hope is a representation, a visual representation of what the hard data is showing us. Now, something important to note about the videos, they are taken from one point in time throughout the peak hour. Our model analyzes an entire hour and does an aggregate of the results to get us our metrics that we're putting into these tables. But this video is from like 1 minute, 1, 2, or 3 minute time within the peak hour. So, there may be some specific points in this network where you think, oh, I know that there's way more congestion there in the morning than what is currently shown in here. Well, we may just have blown the video over the corridor at a time when the main line was in the middle of a very large green band so that the queue had not propagated at that time. So let's just keep that in mind when viewing these videos. But generally, I do think that they're a really neat tool that VISM offers us that is above and beyond what some of the other capacity analysis software provides to aid in the visualization of some of these more complex discussions.
The AM, PM, what, at 12 to 12, but what hours are you pulling from that data?
Yeah, so the AM and PM designations are going to be our AM peak hour and our PM peak hour. And so that's just, it's not, it's not 12, it's not midnight to noon and then noon to midnight. It is 1 hour of time, 160-minute block within the, within the commuter peaks.
I have one more question, Kate. What
Yep.
are you using the data, the traffic data from the adaptive traffic system, or what traffic data are you using for this?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Dietrich. Yes, we are using the signal timings from the adaptive signal system. We were able to put that into our synchro models, and our synchro models then translate into the VISM models. So even though we're using two different modeling software systems to show you this data in different ways, it is the same base data. So it is the same volumes that have gone into synchro as have been input into VISM, and similarly, it's the same signal timings. So the signal timings that we worked with Q3 to get the existing timings that are running out there today. We worked with them to get the exact timings that were running when we did our observations in December. So yes, these should be reflective of the benefits of the adaptive system in place.
Sorry, Kate.
Did you want to go ahead and show the PM video, Nate? So this will be much of the same, just PM instead of AM. So you'll see a similar view of the corridor, kind of flying across and capturing the various rolling queues, the congestion at different points along the corridor. These videos are also completely customizable. If we or the committee, decides that they would like a different view at a different time of a specific intersection, we could cut a new one that focuses just on Spanish Wells, or we could cut a new one that focuses just on Gumtree. But our intention today was to give the committee a sense of, bringing the model to life, so to speak, instead of just trying to convey this information through a graph or some statistics. We hoped that the visual of the cars and the queues and the congestion would, give you comfort that our model is calibrated appropriately, as we believe. You can see here the ramp for the Cross Island Parkway is congested and really backed up, which also happens in the existing conditions. And the congestion is really quite.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, certainly.
This is great to have this model in place, and it can be modified. So have you played around with looking at the results if you put in an overpass, or if you take out a traffic light, or see what the actual effect is on peak hour traffic?
Yeah, so we are going to get into that discussion towards the end of my talking time with you today. We have some ideas as you're describing, what could potentially be implemented along the corridor to relieve some of these areas of congestion. And we have toyed around with those in Synchro at this time. We have not put them into VISM yet. That is part of task 4, as Nate was describing earlier. We are the goal of doing all of the alternatives in Synchro was to get you some answers on potential solutions that could work for the corridor sooner, and like earlier in this study process. VISM models take quite a long time to calibrate, as you guys have seen, but then after the calibration, even to input various alternative configurations requires a lot of care as well to make sure that it's done appropriately. So at this point, our ideas are in Synchro, and then at the end of task 4, we will have one of the alternatives also put into VISM to confirm that our thoughts based on the Synchro results were accurate and adequate. Right. Any more questions on the videos or the existing results before we step into 2045? No, hearing none. Okay. So the 2045 no build results were also done in VISM. Essentially, it takes our calibrated existing VISM model. We insert updated volumes based on the per year growth rate that we worked, with the committee, very hard to determine an appropriate growth rate, all the travel demand modeling exercises that Sharif was able to do. So the 2045 no build model reflects that 0.56% per year growth rate, but it assumes that nothing has been done on the corridor other than minor signal timing improvements. So no geometric improvements, no widening, no new bridge, none of those things. It really is, if you leave this problem for the next 20 years, how much worse is it going to get? And so, as we have seen, and we'll show on the next few slides, travel time is expected to increase by up to approximately 62% when we compare to existing conditions. And that may not even be the real extent of how bad the situation would be. So this table shows travel time in seconds. It's set up similarly to the existing times and the calibration metrics. So the difference on the existing slides were between our observed existing seconds and the model existing seconds. The difference here is the difference between our existing VISM model and then the no-build 2045 VISM model. So this is to show you, the difference in how much worse it's going to be in 20 years if nothing is done to this corridor. So the 62% you're seeing from the bottom right square here, that direction northbound from Moss Creek to the Cross Island Parkway from Sea Pines is the direction where that one's coming from. But I think what's even potentially more telling, Nate, if you go to the next slide, is that we also did this comparison for volumes and the difference in volumes that we're able to get through each of the systems. And so now the volumes will not exactly match, as they shouldn't, because that's the difference between an existing model and a no-build model. But the no-build model intentionally has more volume going through there. And what we look at to see, to measure if a 2045 condition would be able to reasonably handle the increased traffic or not, is, can the geometry of what is out there right now handle the vehicles? Can we physically get, in the model space, the increased number of vehicles through the network as we have it coded? And that was not the case in all of these trial runs that we tried to do. As you can see, there are negative percent values in some of the percent difference. And so that is saying that there were more vehicles that were able to be processed through the existing model than there were in the 2045 no-build model. And we know that there are more vehicles that should have been able to be processed through the 2045 no-build model, because there are going to be more based on traffic growth. So this essentially is saying that, anywhere that we have a negative percent difference, the 2045 model was so congested. There was so much congestion. Cars were not moving through the model with such a degraded level of service that some vehicles were not even able to enter our model space to be captured into these simulation values. So, further confirmation what we already believed from the beginning, what I think everybody assumes is reasonable to be true, that if we do nothing to this corridor, by the time 2045 rolls around, even with a 0.5% growth, which is lower than the growth rates used in some of the other studies that have been done in this area, we're going to see some pretty severe congestion to the likes of, a level that we may not even be able to accurately capture today with our best modeling tools. So, in summary, something should be done to the corridor in the next 20 years to help alleviate this congestion, or else it's just going to get much worse. We have speed maps for the 2045 no-build results as well. So similar to what we showed for existing, there's an AM map, there's a PM map. What's notable about the difference between the existing AM map and what's currently on your screen is that the red congestion band has grown up in the top left corner of the slide, which is congested or standstill conditions propagating really from the bridge further onto the mainland. We have a longer area of a more prominent area of congestion down by Seapine Circle than we did in the existing conditions, and we still have the spots of red congestion at the intersections as we did with existing conditions. And if we flip over to the PM speed map, again, much of the same. The interchange with the Cross Island Parkway was red and existing, but now you can see in the 2045 no-build map, the red has really, propagated down very far down the Cross Island Parkway, farther than it was in the existing conditions. And if we look at Seapine Circle, almost the entire circle, including each of the roads leading up to it, are almost completely congested. Gridlock, standstill, people aren't really able to go anywhere. So we also have an AM and a PM video for 2045 no-build results as well. So Nate, if you just play both of those in succession, after your AM finishes, you can go ahead and play the PM. So these again are the same shots, same intersections, the same length of video. We attempted to make these videos exactly the same, except for there are two different models. So, if someone were to have them up on, two screens and play them side by side, you'd be able to see the differences in the congestion and a visual representation of how much that congestion really means for the corridor and how many cars are, trying to get through these limited geometric areas. While we're watching the videos, does anyone have any questions about the 2045 no-build results or anything else I've gone over up till now?
I have a question. On the afternoon, it looked like there was
can still see.
If I may.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think it's great to see these visualizations, but to me, doesn't have any value right now until I can put that against applying some alternatives. So what do I do an overpass? What if I limit a right-hand turn or a left-hand turn? How does that on a peak hour affect the traffic? And if you play with the model that way, then it becomes, I mean, here you see the cars move, which is all very fun. So what if you throw in other factors, for instance? What if you add a public transportation element to it? And affect the number of cars going on the road? All these things, I guess this is your base model to work from. And you can apply these different scenarios to it.
Yeah, I may have missed your question in there, and if so, I apologize. But yes, at the end, towards the end of the presentation, when we get into our 4 alternatives that we are considering that we think are, best to bring forward as potential solutions at this time, we do get into a comparison of how those alternatives function versus the no-build results and have a general percent improvement as far as travel time is concerned. And again, those are just based on synchro at this point because the VISIM of that entire area is going to be brought forth during task 4, which we will start, as soon as we conclude task 3.
Because I think VISIM or synchro or one of the other ones, you actually, you don't sort of fly over the road. You have an actual map and you can see traffic from one end to the other. And you can see the effects of making changes. For instance, if you change the on-ramp on westbound on-ramp onto the 278 from the Cross Island, if you change that from the 1 lane to the 2 lanes, and I think there's room for it, then you can automatically see how that what kind of effect that has on the whole corridor area. And I think that's really what I like to get to as well. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think you're going to love some of the slides towards the end here. Once we get through some of these other discussions, we will show you exactly those comparisons in synchro. So I don't think the video has very long left to play for this PM, and we can keep moving through our discussion.
Go ahead and move on, Kate.
Okay. Yep. So in general, we have a, high-level conclusions of our existing in 2045 no-build scenarios. So as shown, we believe there's going to be significant congestion that currently exists throughout the study area, and it's expected to be, just exacerbated by 2045 with the forecasted growth. The question has been thrown out a few different times, what would need to be done to maintain the current 4-lane configuration given the, the concern about the right-of-way and the expanded footprint of this corridor. So based on our calculations, we believe that the existing 2023 volumes, so what you have out there today, would need to be reduced by approximately 30% to be able to maintain acceptable traffic operations on your existing roadway. And then in the future, once we apply the annual growth rate of the 0.56% per year, your future 2045 traffic volumes would need to be reduced by approximately 40% for the current 4-lane configuration to continue to operate acceptably. So, Dietrich, you kind of mentioned, what if we do a public transportation system? What if we do some of these other things? A lot of these other ideals are really noble and worthwhile and have lots of merits in many different areas. However, it is not currently our professional opinion that they will reduce traffic at these levels. I don't believe a public transportation system would reduce the traffic demand on the road by 30 or 40%. I think that, corridor improvements, even in combination with some of these other ideas to help mitigate the increase in traffic, are still going to be needed. So therefore, it's our recommendation that a 6-lane section is necessary to accommodate the projected traffic volumes, both on the bridge and on the land. Once you get to the ground through, Squire Pope, Spanish Wells, those areas, to accommodate the existing traffic that you have, and then the future traffic growth through 2045. We also have had a lot of discussion about a second bridge through our various meetings and time together. A second bridge has been discussed well before Lockmuir's involvement in this project, to my understanding. It's been discussed locally as a potential solution for a number of different issues that are currently facing the island. But our professional opinion and the reality is that a new bridge can take up to 20 years to construct once all of the studies, planning, design, and construction is complete. There are a lot of pre-studies and pre-planning that need to be done. It's not so simple as to say, let's draw a dotted line between these 2 points of land and send it off to go make some plans, and then we'll be going to construction in 5 or 6 years. We believe that a complete redo of a travel demand model specific to this scenario would need to be completed. It would take an enormous public involvement effort. It would have numerous environmental reports and steps to go through to determine which alignment, because there are many, would be least impactful, right away, culturally sensitive areas. There are so many different considerations in this area that the pre-planning of something like this would take easily up to 10 years potentially, if those efforts are not currently underway. And it's our understanding that they are not currently in earnest underway in any meaningful fashion. Design of a structure that long and complex would also take another approximately 5 years, and then you have construction. So, that's where we're getting this 20-year estimate in our professional opinion based on, the typical flow of a project like that. So, we've shown today and in previous presentations, the operating conditions of your corridor today already shows significant congestion. It already shows that there are problems, otherwise we wouldn't be here talking to you about this. And so if nothing is done to this corridor for 20 years into the future, in hopes that a second bridge would be our answer to the problems of this corridor, it will be a very hard 20 years along this corridor. As we showed, the 2045 model, it's going to, up to 62% increased travel time delay for the existing conditions, which are already very bad. So because of all of those factors, Lockmuir's focus for this study has been to mitigate your existing and forecasted conditions within the next 20-year time span. Because throughout that time span, the congestion will be significant. And so because it is not our opinion that a new bridge is viable within the next 20 years, we are not considering that as one of our 4 alternatives to solve the corridor congestion between now and 2045. It is our opinion that the 6-lane section is needed independently of a second bridge, and that, that conversation has a lot of merit. It is worthwhile. It is a very lengthy process and is something that would need to be initiated separate from this independent study and the discussions on this corridor specifically. Okay. Are there any questions or comment about the second bridge, Yanni, before we move on? I'm sure there's a few.
I had a question. Could you articulate Lockmuir's sort of professional opinion on Hilton Head and evacuation routes? So the idea has always also been that a second bridge would help the evacuation of the island in a hurricane. If you think that a second bridge is not realistic, would you, and you don't have to answer me now, but can you think about whether 2 bridges rather than 1 span would be more favorable from Hilton Head to the mainland?
Part of our scope is to prepare a high-level memorandum of our opinion on this issue. We have not completed that yet, but it is part of our tasks to be completed, before our efforts are are concluded here. But the SparkNotes version of that, our opinion is that there is a lot of merit to this second bridge conversation, but it is incredibly complex and requires very careful and detailed analysis as to the viability of where or what it would even look like. And because that process is going to take a very, very, very long time, it likely would not come to fruition soon. That is why we are not considering that as an alternative in this study.
I'm not sure you understand me. So right now we have two separate bridges, parallel to each other. Mm-hmm. So there's also thought about having just one single span versus two separate bridges. In case something happens on one bridge, what do you do? So that's sort of my thinking.
Sure, yeah. I think, we also, per our scope, are planning on doing a professional opinion as to more specifics on the bridge that are, I think, getting into your question. I am not a structural engineer, so I don't necessarily feel confident expressing my opinion on bridge structures, in this setting. But that is, we do have structural engineers on our team, and that is part of our study to, do a high-level brief memorandum on that, review of the conclusions that have already been issued and studies that have already been completed on that topic. Okay, so moving on from that point, before we get into the specifics on our 4 alternatives that we are proposing as potential solutions for the corridor, Nate and the town, we thought it would be a good idea just to remind everybody, or put in this presentation at least, the guiding principles for this corridor project. These are not Lockmuir created. They were created, by the town. I'm sure this is nothing new to you all, but again, just thought it would be good to go through this list before getting into the details of our 4 alternatives, just if nothing else to acknowledge that, Lockmuir Group studied each of these guiding principles in detail, and we really tried to hold true to each of them as we considered various alternatives that would be potentially helpful for the corridor. Things like addressing the congestion and fixing the transportation issues, improving safety and quality of life for residents in the neighborhoods and businesses that would be directly impacted by this work. Understanding that there's a desire for aesthetically pleasing improvements and for there to remain a gateway to and from Hilton Head that the region can be proud of. So we tried to keep all these things in mind when we thought of these potential alternatives. So if you go to the next slide, Nate, we can get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation. So we have 4 recommended alternative improvements that we are considering for this study. And, today I'm going to plan to go through each of them. We can either stop after each one to discuss if we have questions, or we can wait until we've kind of gone through all 4 of them and understand the spread of what we're considering and go back and discuss. I really don't have a preference either way. So if you have a question throughout this, please feel free to stop me if you would prefer before we get to the end of, discussing alternative 4. So the first one is an SCDOT modified recommended preferred alternative. Alternative number 2 is a configuration called a bow tie at Squire Pope and Spanish Wells. Alternative number 3 includes grade separated options. Alternatives 1 and 2 both would be what I'm going to refer to probably a lot as at grade, which means there are no bridges. There are no vertical separation components of the roadway for different movements. Everything either, everything's on the ground. Alternative 3 and 4 are grade separated or elevated, meaning that there is some sort of bridge component, vertical stacking component to the solutions. So we are considering an echelon or a center turn overpass for alternative 3. These are types of interchanges, but they still require some signalized control of some movements, but not for others. So we will get into those details. We have some nice explanations to understand what those really mean as we get through those slides. And then alternative number 4, we are considering an elevated bypass. I know that has been another popular topic throughout the course of this study, and even at some of these meetings, we should consider a bypass. And we are giving a nod to that idea in alternative 4, however, putting our spin on it as to what we think is most what would provide the least negative impacts to right-of-way considerations and the cultural impacts that have been stated as being so important for this process. So we can get into alternative 1 as we go to the next slide, Nate. So this is largely what has already been studied, the SCDOT modified recommended preferred alternative. We didn't really deviate very much from what SCDOT has already what SCDOT has already recommended as their preferred alternative. However, there are a few key differences between what SCDOT has already studied, what other people have already studied, and then the study that we have conducted. So Nate, if you go to the next slide, those are listed there. So the differences here are the effects of the adaptive signals being in place. To our knowledge, none of the prior studies considered the effects of your adaptive signal system, and through no fault of their own, they could not, because the system was not even in place really and fully functional until December of this year. So they did not have the privilege of analyzing any potential benefits from your adaptive signal system that was in place. We also have used a different growth rate than any of the prior study efforts, with the 0.56% growth rate that we've already discussed at length in previous meetings as to how we arrived there. And some of the other study efforts also did not include Gumtree. They did not extend long enough to include Gumtree, which this effort, the town and this committee felt was important to include in any of our considerations for alternatives to this, this area. So our improvements to Gumtree considered only at-grade improvements. Gumtree is very close to the existing Cross Island Parkway interchange, and while there are a significant amount of vehicles that process through the Gumtree intersection, some movements could theoretically benefit from being separated from one another, from being taken out of the signal and being grade separated. The nature of where Gumtree is and how close it is to some of the existing bridge system that is part of the Cross Island Parkway interchange really did not seem feasible to us from a constructability standpoint. It did not seem reasonable. So for those reasons, we have considered only at-grade improvements to the Gumtree intersection, which included a complete reconfiguration of what is there today, widening to allow for dual left turn lanes and concurrent left turn movements on most approaches, and really just expanding that to be as large of an at-grade intersection as possible to process the number of vehicles through there that try to traverse that pinch point every day. So on the next slide, we get into some of our findings. Overall, throughout the network for this alternative, the study intersections are expected to operate acceptably under alternative 1. Generally, each signalized intersection is expected to operate with a level of service D or better overall. Many of them have E's or even F's under the existing conditions and the 2045 no-build conditions, so those would be an improvement. Side street and unsignalized approaches may still experience long delays, but quite frankly, that is to be expected on corridors such as this with a really high throughput of vehicles on the main line. If we're not separating movements from one another, then they still have to share the same physical space or the same cycle length. And so many times some of the minor movements are, compromised slightly for the benefit of the main line, which is where most of the cars are. So most of the major intersections are going to be functioning very well. There may be some smaller side streets that, unfortunately are going to take more of the delay than the main line, but it's a compromise that we see all the time on corridors such as this. So in the table at the bottom of the slide, You can see our travel times. These travel times were performed in synchro, so that's a key difference here between the tables that you're going to see on these alternative slides and then the tables that you saw for our existing and no-build VISM slides. Those slides were in VISM.
Kate, I think you cut out.
Harris, we lost your video.
Kate, we can't hear you, Kate.
Wow.
Kate, can you hear us? Okay, go right ahead.
2018 traffic volumes, over 3,000 vehicles per hour. Already, 2018, the numbers are way too low. And this is from a CDOT report.
Underestimated future traffic?
Yeah, they are. And the growth rate's too low.
Can you all hear us now?
Genetically low. I'd like to do it parametrically. I'd like to see your delay times parametrically done. Volume. It's the way you would do it in this, way it is break under various forecasts.
Okay. Yeah, so the bottom table here is similar to the differences that we showed in some of the prior tables with the existing VISM and the no build 2045 VISM tables, except for those percentages were differences in either what we observed as the existing versus what our model was to get the calibrated results for our VISM models, and the no build percentages were a difference of how much worse the potential no build scenario is going to be compared to the existing condition. These tables are these tables are conveying the difference between no build and whichever alternative we're talking about. So this percent difference is the either increase or decrease in travel time that would be associated with alternative one as it's compared back to the 2045 no build. And I think it's important to make the distinction that the tables that you'll see as part of these alternative slides are all compared to synchro. So it's compared to synchro no build versus synchro alternative, whatever number we're talking about. The prior slides at the beginning of the deck were all VISM, and we do plan on bringing the chosen alternative forward into a VISM model as part of task 4, as we've already talked about. But this is still task 3, and we need to kind of work through narrowing down some of these options and go through our matrix exercise before we pick which alternative is going to move forward into task 4, which it will then be put into our VISM modeling software. So just a quick distinction. But the summary of alternative 1 essentially is that the alternative can be expected to provide approximately a 16% reduction in travel time for AM traffic in the eastbound direction, and approximately a 34% decrease in travel time for westbound traffic, so people leaving the island going back onto the mainland in the PM. You move to the next slide. Nope, back one. Yep. There we go. So we were asked by the town to do a further modification of the modified recommended preferred alternative for SCDOT in the area of Squire Pope specifically. There has been some concern expressed about the right-of-way required per that alternative, and so we did a quick high-level analysis to see if what the impacts would be if some of that land area for Squire Pope were potentially to be reduced. So we evaluated if we could reduce the dual eastbound left turn lanes at Squire Pope just to one left turn lane, and we also evaluated if we could reduce the dual southbound right turn lanes at Squire Pope just down to one right turn lane. And the results of each of those reductions are shown in the bullet points below each of those. And, generally, they're part of the SCDOT recommendation because, in my opinion, they provide a very high level benefit for the corridor and a pretty decent reduction in travel time and queuing. So if you do not provide the dual eastbound left turn lane, if you only provide one at Squire Pope, the queue length would be expected to increase from approximately 7 vehicles to 23 vehicles, so 16 more vehicles required to wait during the PM peak hour. And then the delays are expected to increase from approximately 75 seconds to over 200 seconds, which is an increase of 139 seconds. It's over 2 minutes during the PM peak hour. Similarly, if we reduce the dual southbound right turn lanes at Squire Pope to just a single right turn lane, the movement would be over capacity. The queue length would be expected to increase by approximately 15 vehicles from 9 to 24 during the PM peak hour. And then the delays at that same movement would be expected to increase from 50 to 116 seconds, which adds a minute to the delay at that movement during the PM peak hour. So, again, these are certainly things to consider. Obviously right-of-way impacts are a very serious thing to consider and is something that should not be taken lightly. And, these would be the impacts of lessening the right-of-way take and reducing the footprint of Squire Pope in alternative 1 per, what SCDOT had recommended as part of their modified preferred alternative. Are there any questions about alternative 1 before we talk about alternative 2?
Curious, are those two intersections that you were just talking about now, are they traffic actuated? Signals?
The signals at Squire Pope, are they actuated?
Yeah, are they traffic actuated? Yes. They are?
Yes, I mean, when we implement the adaptive signal system, I believe updated detection and actuation is part of that entire system. So yes, I believe so. So these results are on top of the adaptive signal timing improvements that are already embedded in our synchro models of alternative one. So these would be results that would be true even with adaptive signal timing measures in place. Any other discussion on alternative one? Hearing none, we can go to the next slide. So alternative two, our idea for alternative two is to do what is called a bow tie intersection at Squire Pope and Spanish Wells. And generally when we were thinking about alternatives and the four that we were tasked with, coming up with and providing as potential solutions for this corridor, we wanted to make sure we had enough balance of at-grade intersections, which means, without any bridges, and then grade-separated alternatives, which would require some grade separation structures to make the configurations work. As this committee knows, as most of the listeners here today know, there have been numerous alternatives that have been looked at as part of prior study efforts, upwards of 19 to 20. The initial recommendation from SCDOT to do, some different left turn treatments at Old Wild Horse and median U-turn configurations, those types of things. Part of our prior discussions, we understand that that's not necessarily desired as one of your alternatives here. And while those ideas, held a lot of water from a technical perspective and would, on paper, move traffic through the corridor efficiently. Lockmuller understands that there was community concern for some of those prior study efforts. And so as part of our scope, we were also tasked with looking through some of the things that you guys had considered before and maybe bringing back an idea that perhaps was dismissed a little bit too quickly to see if it deserved a second look. And so, we consider this alternative two, our nod to doing that. Bow ties and this idea is something that was considered as part of the prior 19 to 20 alternatives that have been considered for this effort to date. And we think that it is something that is worth considering, again, worth further consideration. So if you go ahead and play this YouTube video, it'll describe how you travel through a bow tie.
Motorists continue straight and turn right, just like at a conventional intersection.
I don't know, does it have the audio on your end? Can you hear anything, or you just hear me?
I can turn the audio back on.
To make a U-turn and then continue straight. From the side street, all motorists will navigate through a roundabout before
If the
reaching
audio
the
doesn't
main
work, it's not a big
intersection.
deal. I just didn't want to be talking
Motorists
over
who
it.
wish to make a left turn onto the main street will continue straight through the main intersection to the next adjacent roundabout and make a U-turn.
So
These
generally,
motorists will then turn
how
right
you-
at the main intersection onto the
Is the audio on or not?
I'll turn the audio off and allow you to chat through it.
major street.
Okay.
All of
So generally how you move throughout a bow tie is if, the intersection, the main intersection itself does not allow left turns, which is where a lot of the efficiency comes from. It's also where a lot of the safety comes from if you do not allow left turns at the intersection. So anybody that wants to make a left would first make a right, traverse through a roundabout, and then, proceed through your intersection in question. That would be true for main line. That'd be true for any direction of travel. If you want to be making a left-hand turn, you're going to first make a right, travel through the roundabout, and then proceed through your intended direction of travel. So, this would require two roundabouts, one on either side of both Squire Pope and Spanish Wells. The exact placement of those roundabouts is up for. I'm sorry, someone have a question?
No, they just wanted to clarify, this is not on the study corridor. This is a sample. This is just a sample intersection.
Correct. This video is pulled from Virginia Department of Transportation, and they do a really nice job of visualizing some of these tougher concepts to grasp as far as how you traverse through a corridor. And so that's why we pulled the video in just as an illustrative tool to help visualize how a driver may find their way through this intersection, particularly if they were hoping to turn left. If you're just going straight through or turning right, you don't do anything different than you do today. But left turns are treated a little bit differently. So again, as I said before, this alternative removes left turns from both Squire Pope and Spanish Wells. The vehicles must navigate through the bow tie intersections, but the bow tie part of that are just two roundabouts, to make their left turn movements. If you click to the next slide, we list the pros and cons of this configuration. One of the largest pros is that it's going to improve safety because there will be fewer conflicting vehicle and pedestrian movements allowed. Bow tie intersections have 12 fewer conflict points when compared to traditional intersections. And just statistically, if we have fewer points where there are potential conflict zones, that is removing 12 potential collision points within a traditional intersection. So naturally, anything that removes left turns from the intersections, are going to really increase the safety of the configuration into the future. This will encourage lower vehicle speeds because people will be, traversing through a roundabout. This reduces the size of the intersections overall because the left turn lanes are removed from the main line and the side streets. It increases the efficiency of the signalized intersections because more of the signal time can go to the main through movements as opposed to the left turning movements, which will improve traffic operations. Some of the downsides for a bow tie. One of the obvious ones, of course, is that it requires a change in decision-making for drivers, and all of the left turn movements would become right turns. Have to navigate through a roundabout and return to travel straight through the intersection into their intended direction of travel. So this will increase the amount of travel time for left-turning vehicles, and this also will potentially require some additional right-of-way in different areas for the roundabouts that are, farther away from the main corridor that has been in question so far. If you go to the next slide, Nate, we get into a similar slide as we provided for alternative 1, what the benefits would be. Overall, this configuration at Squire Pope and Spanish Wells is expected to improve operations throughout the study area. Each signalized intersection would be expected to operate with a level of service D or better. This is going to be the same story for side streets or unsignalized side street movements for the entire corridor. If it doesn't have a signal, it may still be experiencing long delays at the main corridor simply because we need to provide a little bit of preference to the higher volume movements, which are those mainline traffic movements along 278. And then, we have another comparison table here at the bottom where alternative 2 could potentially provide up to a 15% reduction in travel time for eastbound traffic in the AM and potentially up to a 36% reduction in travel time for westbound vehicles in the PM. We have a slide at the end that compares all of the alternatives against one another, puts these tables kind of on the same screen. But if we remember from a few slides ago, alternative 1 provided about 16% for AM eastbound. Alternative 1 provided approximately 34% for the westbound direction in the PM. So these two alternatives are really remarkably close to one another in the improvement of level service and decrease in travel time that they would provide. If you go to the next slide, we did attempt to quantify the change in travel time that would be expected for the displaced left turn movements. I know that is probably going to be one of the largest concerns for this alternative specifically. And so as you can see, the left turns at Squire Pope do experience, in some places, a pretty appreciable amount of added delay to their travel time, not greater than 2 minutes, but, some of those numbers in there are between 1 minute and 2 minutes. The largest increase in the travel time, though, I'll note is for the northbound left turn, which is not a high volume movement at Squire Pope. It's really rather low. So, yes, there will be some increase in travel time for left turning folks. But again, the benefit of that is 15% decrease in travel time for the corridor in the AM and 36% decrease in travel time for the corridor westbound in the PM. So there are going to be trade-offs in any of these alternatives that we're talking about. If we look at Spanish Wells, however, the current configuration of Spanish Wells is so congested that this configuration actually will save most people travel time at the intersection, even though they will have to travel farther out of their way, traverse through a roundabout, and come back. So, that is encouraging, and certainly speaks to how congested the existing configuration is today. Are there any questions about alternative 2 and these bow ties before we go to alternative 3?
Any questions? Don't say any.
Okay. Alternative 3 is, we have a few different options that we could do here. So we considered either an echelon or a center turn overpass, and we do have another video that we could show you for an echelon, but unfortunately we do not have a video for the center turn overpass, so I'm going to do my best to describe each of these for you before we get into the slides. Each of these configurations is what I'm going to call a partially grade separated interchange. And the partially grade separated is that there are no free flow movements in any direction, and only some of the movements are elevated onto the bridge section. So for an echelon, you move 2 entire legs of the intersection. So, and they should be opposing. So like southbound and westbound, or northbound and eastbound, but one L of the intersection, so to speak, gets elevated and the other one stays down below. And so there are essentially 2 signalized intersections on top of one another. And by doing that, you allow each of the intersections to be 2-phase signals, one direction at a time. And then traffic would merge back in to free flow traffic, in the middle of the corridor segment, as opposed to at these intersection pain points. A center turn overpass is similar. However, all of the left turns, or all of the turns rather, are elevated into the middle. So most of your main line 3 traffic stays down. They don't have to go up onto the bridge section. They still are, 2 signals stacked on top of one another, so to speak. They still both would be able to generally be 2-phase signals and benefit from that efficiency. But you wouldn't have to elevate a major movement. Like we wouldn't have to elevate one of the legs of 278 with a center turn overpass, which could potentially reduce the required, bridge footprint and naturally reduce costs associated with that. So if we step through the slide deck here, we have another video. Nate, if you play it again, we can kind of watch how this goes, and I'll try and talk over it. Again, this is a Virginia Department of Transportation video. I think they do a really nice job of visualizing some of these innovative intersection concepts and making it easy to understand how drivers would traverse through them. So again, this is not a mock-up of our corridor. This is just a general public information tool that Virginia DOT provides on their website, and I think it's really rather useful. So if anybody on the committee or anybody in the public is interested in hearing this video with sound, or poking around their website to see more information on any of these configurations, it's pretty easy to find. They have a really nice website, so I'd certainly encourage anybody to do that. So how do you use an echelon as a motorist? There really is there's not much difference intuitively of how you traverse through the intersection. You don't have to exit early. You don't have to turn right to turn left. You don't have to turn around at a U-turn or a roundabout. You're driving as you normally would have. It's just part of the road is going to be elevated and part of it is not, depending on which leg of the intersection you're going to be at. And then as you traverse through the intersection in your intended direction of travel, you may or may not be required to ride or ramp down and merge back in with the main line of traffic in whichever direction you are headed. There are a lot of benefits for pedestrians and bicyclists for this option too, because we're stacking the intersections on top of one another. Generally, that means that the footprint is less than if the entire intersection was combined and at grade. So that allows for shortened crossing distances for pedestrians, which is really, really quite nice. It's not as daunting to cross, 6 or 8 lanes of traffic where you could be, walking under the bridge and potentially only crossing 4 or 5 lanes of traffic. You may be able to avoid having pedestrian islands that way. It's really, it'll have shorter wait times, improved safety. Again, if we are taking out a lot of the conflict points because we're separating what used to be one intersection into 2, essentially, that's going to have some improved safety, reduced conflict areas and improved safety implications as well. So if you go to the next slide, some of the benefits of the echelon, the pros and cons of the echelon or the center turn overpass are largely going to be the same. But pros for the echelon, it's going to improve safety for fewer conflicting vehicle and pedestrian movements. The echelon intersection has 10 fewer conflict points when compared to traditional intersections. It does not require a change in decision making for drivers because all movements would remain at the point where they are currently making decisions today. It's going to increase the efficiency of the signalized intersections because we're splitting one into 2 and we are reducing the number of phases that have to be served at each of the signals through that way. So each movement's going to get more green time allocated to them. And it has the potential to reduce the amount of right-of-way needed by the grade separation and elevating some of these movements. Some of the cons, of course, it requires grade separation. It requires bridges. Those things are naturally going to be more expensive to construct, potentially more expensive to maintain. And, overall, it would still be a rather large intersection. I don't think there's any way around that, although all movements are still going to be allowed at this configuration. So, as far as public acceptance or comfort driving through some of these grade separated alternatives, it hopefully would not be too much of a learning curve to learn how to get where you're going through one of these configurations. If you click to the next slide.
Kate, can I ask
Yes.
you, the echelon model, I think it's a good one. Does that mean that it eliminates the traffic lights? So the traffic lights on 278 from Spanish Wells, Gumtree, but on 278. So is that possibility?
The signals would stay. So I know that it's kind of hard from the video to see, under the bridge, but it would be 2 signalized intersections on top of one another, essentially. And so for the echelon specifically, one leg of 278 and one leg of the side street, whether it be Squire Pope or Spanish Wells, would still be would be at the same level. So one would be down, one would be up, and then those intersection points would be controlled by a signal. But instead of that signal having to pay attention to 4 directions of traffic and up to 8 phases if you include left turns, it's only paying attention to 2 directions of traffic and can be a 2-phase signal as opposed to an 8-phase signal. And so that's going to allow more green time to be served to every movement. And then they will merge back in, in a free flow condition back onto whatever road they're trying to get on, but at a mid-block location instead of doing all of that at the intersection congestion point.
But I would think if you have a simple overpass, you can do away with the traffic lights, no?
There are completely grade separated interchanges that we certainly did consider, but to do away with the traffic lights completely, you a lot of times have to make things completely free flow movements, and that requires a lot of ramps, usually a lot of right of way, a lot of deceleration, extended deceleration and acceleration lanes if it's a free flow movement rather than being controlled by a signal. There are a lot of geometric implications with providing something that does not require a signal in the configuration. And what we really liked about the echelon and the center turn overpass was that you had a lot of the same benefits of a true interstate interchange in a much tinier footprint. You didn't have, if you're familiar with a cloverleaf interchange, like what is on many of the interstate systems throughout the United States, if you look over top of it, you kind of have the 4 quadrants of 4-leaf clover and 8 ramps all around. Those things are massive. That would have very severe right-of-way implications for this corridor. And so we felt that something with a smaller footprint and a bit more constrained would be a nice compromise, considering all the competing interests that we're hoping to hit for the solution. Any other questions on the echelon?
So the only way to, because I think the real value is in getting rid of those lights, yeah? So then you have every other light you have on that track is a problem. But you only see elimination of those lights by doing a clover. There's no other way.
There are other ways. Yeah, I was speaking in a bit of a generality there. So alternative 4, I think, is what you'll be interested to see once we kind of get through there and finish our discussion on alternative 3. Alternative 4 does have a configuration that is a nod to our bypass idea, and also is remove some of the lights in certain places of the corridor, as you're noting. So if it's okay, I'll move through and just briefly describe the center turnover pass, make sure nobody has questions on that, and then we can get into alternative 4, which is more of the true bypass, which I think you're interested in, Dietrich. So a center turnover pass, again, we don't have a video of this one, but this graphic hopefully illustrates about the same thing. Generally, you are going to make a turn in the same direction as you would under a normal at-grade signalized intersection today. However, if you're making a left turn, you're just going to take a ramp up, and the left turns then would be the top signalized intersection above the rest of the movements, which would stay at grade below. So this could potentially reduce the size of the structure that's required. Obviously, one left turn lane elevated is different than elevating an entire leg of both roadways. So that's a potential benefit for the center turnover pass over echelon. But again, to make a left turn, you take the left turn ramp up to the elevated intersection, turn left at a traffic signal, and then you merge with through traffic on your way back down to grade level. Again, pedestrians can use marked crosswalks to safely cross the intersection at grade. Depending on the level of comfort, bicyclists can still navigate the intersection using vehicle or bicycle paths. It really just removes a phase of the signal by still allowing left turns to happen where they do today. It's just going to be elevated and on top of, so to speak, the existing intersection configuration. So if you click to the next slide, we again list pros and cons of this alternative. They're going to be largely the same as they were for the echelon. It improves safety because you have for conflicting vehicle and pedestrian movements. The center turn overpass intersection has 8 fewer conflict points when compared to traditional intersections. It increases our efficiency because we're able to reduce the number of phases at our signals. It reduces the size of the intersection because left turn lanes are removed from the at grade setting. Some cons: it does require grade separation, which does require bridge structures, which is going to require more money to construct than a traditional at-grade intersection. And overall, it still would be a very large intersection, likely, but movements would still be allowed where they currently exist today. There would not be any rerouting confusion for residents or visitors to the island alike. It's still pretty intuitive how to navigate through this system. So if you click on the next slide, we have an alternative of either of these. And so when we're considering alternative 3, we think that either this echelon or the center turnover pass have value at Squire Pope or Spanish Wells. But the reality is that there's not room along the corridor to have one of them at both. So we're viewing this as an either or, like either you have this grade separated intersection provided at Squire Pope or at Spanish Wells. The other one would still be a regular at grade intersection. And the reason for that is that there's not enough room to get up and then back down between Squire Pope and Spanish Wells. Even if there was a small area where it technically would work, we are concerned about the safety and implications of weaving that we would be asking turning vehicles or merging vehicles to perform then before they would approach that next intersection. So for this purpose, we are assuming that this is an either or situation. We're going to have one of these either at Spanish Wells or at Squire Pope, but not both. So we have a more extensive table on the next slide that's going to show this, but generally any combination of that is going to provide acceptable levels of service along the corridor. Intersections at major points are going to operate with level of service D or better. same story, side streets still may have some lesser levels of service provided, but that is a compromise to try and have the main line run as efficiently as possible. The long queues and delay that are expected under the no build condition are generally going to be improved with any of these alternatives 1 through 3 that we've talked about. So if you go to the next slide, we have this expanded table from what we've shown for alternatives 1 or 3, but it's the same information. So, this is every combination of either an echelon at Squire Pope or Spanish Wells or a center turn overpass at Squire Pope or Spanish Wells. We generally don't see many differences from a traffic perspective on which option would ultimately be selected for alternative 3 here. I think that it's going to be more of a geometric or right-of-way issue and more of a discussion on tie-down points and which legs to be elevated if the echelon is preferred, those types of things. But generally, just to give you guys an idea of how these perform against one another, an echelon at Squire Pope would be a potential 32% reduction eastbound AM, 60% reduction westbound PM. Echelon at Spanish Wells really doesn't perform as well, but it still is pretty decent reduction. 21% eastbound in the AM, 40% westbound in the PM. And then if we go to the center turn overpasses, at Squire Pope, it would be about an 18% reduction eastbound in the AM, 41% reduction. PM in the westbound, those numbers aren't quite as high as the echelon at Squire Pope, but they're similar and they still provide a really nice reduction. And then a center turn overpass at Spanish Wells would be about a 20% reduction eastbound AM, 45% reduction eastbound PM. Again, if you compare that number to the echelon number at Spanish Wells, those are pretty similar too. If it was decided that this type of intersection configuration was preferred at Spanish Wells rather than Squire Pope. So, are there any questions about alternative 3 and the idea of this, kind of quasi-grade separated intersection?
Questions? I'm not seeing any, Kate.
Nope. Okay, great. So we can move on to alternative 4. So as Nate noted in the beginning, alternative 4 is one that we have not quite pinned down all of our traffic numbers on yet. We are still working through some of the ins and outs. The geometrics were a little complicated, and so we spent most of our time prior to this meeting making sure that we were able to, draw something up that made sense to give access to all these movements. Prior to the April 10th meeting, as it's noted at the bottom of this slide, we will have operating results and confirmed tie-in points and, further defined what this would look like at the April 10th meeting. But generally, our alternative 4 is an elevated bypass, a nod to the idea, Dietrich, that you've been discussing in this meeting and in others, that we need some, the corridor could potentially benefit from having a bypass option where vehicles that don't really need to go to Squire Pope or Spanish Wells or Gumtree that want to bypass all of that can get out of the way, not have to go through all of these at-grade signalized intersections, and potentially relieve some of that congestion for the local traffic that is traversing through this network. So our idea for our bypass would largely stay within the existing corridor footprint. And so that is the difference between some of the ideas that have been floated prior and this alternative 4 that we are going to show you today. It's our opinion that constructing a new bypass through virgin wetlands and other lands where there is not currently a roadway could open up a number of environmental concerns or roadblocks, quite frankly, that would prevent that idea from ever coming to light. So we tried to see if there is an idea that could work largely within the existing corridor footprint, and that is what we've come up with today. So generally, it's, I'll describe it as best I can. If we have specific questions about the bypass, I know we have Lauren Jackson on the phone, who's our senior engineer. He, really developed these drawings and, is intricately aware of the ins and outs and how some of this could be constructed. So the idea would be that the middle lanes that you see would be an elevated 4-lane bypass, 2 lanes in each direction. And then there would be a 1-lane collector road, as you will, that would be kind of on the outside of that bypass that would still be at grade on the ground where it is today. And that would be what serves the local traffic and serves Squire Pope and Spanish Wells. And the launch point for that bypass would be to the west of Squire Pope. And then if you click through these slides, I think there are 3 of them. We would continue with an elevated roadway section. As you can see, we're still providing full access on the local system for people to turn in every direction, from that local roadway system. We still have the 4 lanes elevated throughout this entire stretch. 4 lanes elevated through Spanish Wells. You'd still be able to turn in every direction at a signalized intersection on the ground at Spanish Wells. And then we get into how it would tie into our existing Cross Island Parkway. And then if you go to the next slide, largely we're following the alignment of the existing roadway. There is one new, kind of bridge ramp, so to speak, where people that were on the elevated section, if they wanted to continue to the east on 278 and bypass Gumtree, they could do that. Or you're also able to go on the existing Cross Island Parkway to the south and down to like the Sea Pine Circle area. As we have this drawn today, there's also the option for people to get onto the bypass east of Gumtree to then continue all the way to the west out and be on the bypass, so they don't have to go through the Spanish Wells and Squire Pope intersections to ultimately leave the island and get back to the mainland. So we think that this idea, Nate said in the beginning of the meeting, we've numbered these sequentially in how we kind of thought about the magnitude of the improvements, not necessarily in any sort of order as like best to worst or like favorite to least favorite. But if you've noticed, 1 and 2 were still at grade intersections, didn't include bridges, assuming they're going to be the least costly to construct with materials because of the bridge, the lack of bridges. Alternative 3 is, kind of an in-between. We have some bridges, but we still have signals. Nothing is, completely elevated or, without signals and can bypass that congestion. And then this alternative 4 would be a true, remove a bulk of the traffic from the local system completely. And, this is an idea that we think would be worth considering if an improvement of that magnitude is desired.
Kate,
And so, yes.
I'm sure you've seen the other bypass idea that has been floated around, which is not elevated, but runs south of the 278 and then ties into the Cross Island, going over Spanish Wells Road. And
Yes.
one of the thoughts that we had, and I think I would like to ask you to consider that and to model that, because it is, of course, a wide slab of concrete, but not elevated, except for over Spanish Wells Road. And since 50-60% of the traffic goes on to the Cross Island, that would also achieve the taking cars off the regular business 278 and funneling it directly to tie in to the 278, to the Cross Island Parkway. Have you and Nate seen that that proposal that has been floating around?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we've seen that alignment, and we believe that this achieves the same thing that you just described, taking cars from 278, bypassing some of the local traffic. It has an option to tie in directly to the Cross Island Parkway. It also has additional benefits that the other bypass does not, which allows people to bypass Gumtree even and continue to the east on 278. And this also has the added benefit of staying largely within the existing roadway alignment, which would avoid some of the environmental concerns and potential roadblocks and red flags that would be associated with trying to put a new corridor through previously undeveloped roadways.
Yeah, Kate, my big concern with this, the proposed new development, there's no consideration to soil mechanics. And elevated because of the wetlands there. First, you have to get approval for wetlands. We're gonna go through and we're gonna preload that, so we see what the settlement is. And we're looking at 18 to 24 months to get the preload set and the additional cost of that. I think it's like playing darts. Instead of having the dartboard, you're throwing the dart at a concrete wall. It's gonna bounce back. So, that's an idea that we should throw out and not even consider, because there are too many red flags.
Nate, if there was a question
thank you
in
for
there, I
that.
don't think I caught it. Could you repeat it,
Excuse me.
please?
I think it's an option we definitely need to look at, and we're going through wetlands and on other places as well. And just to bluntly throw it out like that, and
Soil mechanics. Soil mechanics.
well, you have soil mechanics everywhere along the whole thing. So my request here to Lochmuller is to take that idea seriously, see what it comes out with.
So I'm going to ask Sean to address some of that, because what has been floating around has some challenges to it. So Sean, I want you to address that now, if you could.
Yes, sir. Well, a couple of things. One, in general, we were tasked to have a consultant come and do an independent review. The bypass that has been mentioned, which runs south of the current alignment, has been provided to Lochmuller. And in their scope, they've recommended 4 alternatives that they believe are worthy of consideration. The bypass that has been proposed south of the current alignment, when the Stony community was designated a traditional cultural property, it meant that there was a goal of the project to minimize the impact of properties within that area. While most of the property is publicly owned or town owns, it doesn't distinguish that impact between public and private. In addition, there would be at least 5 to 9 private properties that will be impacted above and beyond any that are already identified. And so there are some significant concerns. Wetland environmental concerns are one thing. Obviously, the soils are another condition that Mr. Warner has brought up. I've talked through with our technical team about the bypass, not to say we like it or don't like it, but asked Lochmuller to take a look at it and see if it was an alternative they thought was viable to remain in their work. And I think what you've heard from Kate and Nate today is, I think this alternative 4, again, not put words in their mouth, but in their opinion, is an alternative that achieves very similar goals that the bypass that was presented by Citizen, right, achieves and is worthy of consideration. The idea that the consultant will model every alternative that someone brings up is not really an independent part. We've had 19 alternatives. The bypass was another one that they've considered. They've recommended 4. I'm trying to make sure that they're working within the scope of work that town council and the committee approved, and let them do their work and give you the results based on their professional opinion. So thank you for letting me make those comments.
Thank you, Sean. But if I look at an elevated overpass, I seriously doubt that residents of Hilton Head would buy that. And I think it's, to me, that's dead in the water. I mean, that's not going to fly among the residents of Hilton Head, even though it may be a good solution. I think that a more practical solution, and the other thing that we need to look at with the other bypass idea, is that it seems that has less of an impact on the Stony community than 6-lane bridge and so on that we're trying to do right now. So I would like to have it evaluated, have it modeled, and take a look at it. And if it really doesn't fly, then okay, let's drop it. But to me, it seems that we leaving the 278 business corridor by a good percentage of the traffic makes a hell of a lot of sense. So, and of course you do have to have, you're going through wetlands any which way, with the whole project. And that the effect that this alternative has on the wetlands is really quite minimal. And so I would ask you, I would even put a motion forward if somebody wants to second my motion to have this as a viable alternative to be looked at instead of an elevated bypass.
Make a couple more comments. So, in looking at the other bypass, the one south of the current alignment, if this is elevated, there would be requirements to elevate that bypass that by Mr. Bear over Squire Pope and Spanish Wells, and what I was going to say, the tie-ins. So if you were to drive off island on the bypass heading to the mainland, and you're south of current William Hilton Parkway, there's going to be another flyover to tie back in, right, to blend into that main line. So you're looking at least 4 separate elevated treatments, right? To execute what is proposed in that bypass. The start point and end point, right? That doesn't alleviate where you saw the biggest red in the AM peak, which is at the bridges, right? The Bluffton flyover merged with William Hilton Parkway. That's where the greatest AM peak congestion is. And the PM, it's really around Gumtree Road to Cross Island. You can see the backup. I live it every day. The backup on the Cross Island is exactly what it says there. I was backed up all the way to the U-turn or further a couple times last week. So they're very similar in how they operate, and one is not as simple as just having a secondary road to the south. Where the road was being proposed, it's either going to impact the Crazy Crab and the Stewart properties on the south, and if if it's not physically impacting it, and it's moved further into Jarvis Creek, it still has impact. Now it has a greater impact on the wetland and environmental. It's going to be visual impacts along that side now from both sides of Jarvis Creek. So I just want, it's not Sean to evaluate. I'm just letting you know our consultants have looked at that, and they believe, based on all of the factors that I think are being discussed,
Yeah, but
that
Sean,
they come
to
up with
me,
an alternative.
this elevated track is dead in the water. People in Hilton Head, tourists, they're all going to say, "Ugh, what are we here?" Jacksonville with overpasses and underpasses. I think it doesn't work. And to have that as a fourth alternative, just to have a fourth alternative, I think is not worth it. I'd much rather see, and if it shows that it really fails, okay, fine, but it's not leaving any stone unturned. I think we should.
The issue with not leaving any stone unturned is
If I could make a comment here on the bypasses, just real quick, as far as the viability of the separate bypass to the south. We did kind of give it a cursory look when those alignments came through, and we had a few concerns. One is you're still going to need an at-grade intersection to the west at the split, which is going to be a problem as far as throughput of traffic. You're also, if you're at grade to the south, you're still going to need to provide local access to those properties down there. So at that point, you're creating some sort of access for locals. They're either going to need to be signalized, or you're going to have this massive through traffic coming through with just side street stop control, and very difficult. It'll be very difficult for anybody to get out onto the roadway there. And then you would require an overpass at the very least at Spanish Wells, and then of course going over the wetland area. And So, I mean, it's not that it can't be done, but the overall impacts of it, it's not something that can be done in the short term. On a new alignment, you're going to have to go through all the environmental reviews. I mean, you're probably talking at least 10 years before anything could get built as far as a bypass, after you get through all that.
That's ridiculous.
Takes to get environmental approval.
But let's, bring it back, and I appreciate the inputs, as to what options to look at. And we could come up with a tremendous number of variations that could be done. But do they make the most sense for our community, and is it within the scope of what we're trying to do with the budget that we have? Mr. Bear, I appreciate your different variations that you've provided over the past, but we're here to rely on the experts to provide us with a directive as to what they see as feasible in the best interest
I
of the
think
community.
they need to evaluate both. One screws the people in Stony, the other requires moving some pickleball
But Mr.
courts,
Barry,
which are ready
we'll
in
come back
the
to
wetlands.
public comment here in a little bit.
May I ask Kate or Nate, of the four alternatives you've presented here today, have you put a number on any of them?
From an overall costing standpoint,
Cost.
that's something that
Sorry, I think I was-
we're working through at this moment. We're going to have for you at the April 10th
You're
meeting.
going to work on that? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I just have one more slide that I want to get through, and then we were going to end and open it up for questions. And I think that might be a good place to continue the conversation and answer this question a little bit. So go to the next slide, Nate. At our April, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. At our April 10th meeting, we plan to bring back a comparison matrix of all of these alternatives with a high-level assessment of a number of these other factors that align with the town goals, including right-of-way environmental cost is going to be one of them, as far as like relative cost of them against one another. What is going to be the least expensive to the most expensive to build? We're going to take into consideration aesthetic, community, and social impact. We're going to assess each of these for bicycle and pedestrian impact, and we're planning on ranking them in 1 through 4, as in like something that was deemed number 1 in a certain category, we feel provides the best value in that specific category as compared to the other 4. And if there are any that we feel really are about equal to one another, we would tie those, so something could be rated, 2 could be rated 1, but then the next one would be rated 3, so to speak. And so we've given you an example of a blank matrix here that you can expect to see at the April meeting. We've put a few illustrative numbers in there that don't really mean anything, just to show you, how we plan to fill it out. But we believe that this decision cannot be made in a vacuum, and it also cannot be made solely looking at traffic operations and throughput or traffic simulations. There are a number of other very, very important considerations to take into account. And so we are going to, as Nate noted at the beginning of the meeting, have our environmental team finish their work to give us an opinion of the environmental impact. We will have a finalized assessment of the right-of-way impacts of each of these. Cost will be included. All of these other factors will be, kind of summarized, and we can discuss each of these at the April 10th meeting. So we threw a lot of information at you today. A lot of it was traffic related. When we come back at April 10th, none of the traffic information will have changed, but now we just will have some of these additional context to consider each of these alternatives in when we think about, one that may be more preferred over another. And that was my last slide. So, any other questions or further conversation, we certainly welcome the input.
I would just say this, that some of these things you have here are actually somewhat subjective, correct?
In terms of
Like-
the pros, in terms of the pros and
like
cons.
what?
In terms of putting 1 to 4 on them or whatever.
Someone
Maybe
research-
maybe the aesthetic one, yes, but we will have
Wouldn't that be-
data to back up the right of way, the environment, the safety, the bike ped, and the cost.
But again, the cost is not so much subjective, I guess, but some of the other things, aestheticness of a particular item is. Yeah, okay. Aesthetics of, for example, that one column, isn't that basically in the eye of the beholder?
Sure, it certainly is. And we would take our cues from prior town stated desires and public comment and documents to fill
So
that one out.
Lockmuller then will be doing this these evaluations, I take it.
Yes, we will fill out a draft matrix, but we also will value and consider input from the town and community where appropriate. And I think the aesthetic column is certainly one of those areas where, as you note, there is some flexibility in how it is scored. But most of the other columns will be backed by qualitative data.
Other comments or questions?
I have a bunch of questions, constructive manner, because I think that I will email these things to Sean as well for consideration in the modeling, because ultimately we want to be able to compare the various alternatives. So does the general public, and just for a better understanding and really for creating the best possible outcome for this project. So when we started this whole process, we were quite keen to have an independency and to have new ideas from Lochmuller. And there are a few new ideas that have come about. What do you call it? The traffic circle to avoid left-hand turns, and some of the overpass ideas. And I think it has taken a lot of time and work of Lochmuller, and I credit to you guys for putting all that in, and the hours spent also by the town. And I think that's a fantastic thing that you have done. But so having said that, there are a bunch of things that I think need to be more granular on. And I'll just go through a list and I will summarize it and distribute it later on. Talking about. So I think it'd be very good to, when we talk about safety and impact, to quantify what the impact on the various model is on the Stony community and the community in general. And maybe we can be more granular on that. Ultimately, also be helpful to see simulation models in action, not the visual video that we get, but to really see a top-down of the entire area and see how certain variables will affect the traffic flow, because you can't see that really on the models that you've presented today. So one of the elements is, for instance, do away with the merge coming from the Cross Island Parkway going west onto the 278. Have that continue as a 2-lane rather than a 1-lane, because you always see the congestions taking place at that crucial point. And ultimately, you get 5 lanes that you don't have to find a merge for. Get off the island. So I think that's one simulation item that I would be happy if you could put that in at some point. Then I also think to add a time factor into the model. So for instance, the critical thing is the rush hours. So what happens if you put a time limitation on the Windmill Harbor light? Very peak of the traffic hour. Or find another solution for the Windmill Harbor, because you can, in effect, do a loop under the bridge with the circle back onto the westbound 278. That's possibility to do that. So can we add that as another thing in that bucket? Then when we talk about an 11-lane bridge, everybody sort of goes crazy. And I wonder if we can have an opinion on whether we need 2 breakdown lanes. I think that we see from the data that we need 3 lanes, but to have 2 breakdown lanes seems excessive. Can we have 1 breakdown lane that can be converted during peak hours to a regular lane, so you actually have even a wider bridge that can be used coming onto the island and out of the island as well. And that can be maybe accomplished also by having the indicators on the road, the red axis and the green axis, to show which lanes can be used. The other thing is that I think we all like bikers and we like to create bike paths on Hilton Head Island. But I think it's worthwhile a cost-benefit analysis of creating a bike lane across the bridge. I mean, I understand that people want to be able to bike all the way to Bluffton, but is it really, and these are hard choices to make, is it really worthwhile conveniencing 2 bikers for another lane on the bridge? Or is it a solution to possibly convert that bike lane into something else if we need to? And so if the bike lane doesn't work, and if we do want it, and nobody uses it, maybe we can... Then what we haven't hit upon is public transportation. And that is an important element that also affects the traffic data. And I think it'd be very useful, probably part of a bigger plan, because if you do public transportation, it's also got to work. You've got to have the whole infrastructure on Hilton Head Island. But take cars off the road, we want to talk about public transportation for service personnel and people that don't need to have a van with their tools or material. Would be a useful element to add to that equation and into your simulation modeling. Then I think I would also like to see what Lochmuller thinks about the adaptive traffic management system. Have we really scraped the bottom of the barrel on that? Right now we have, it's divided up in clusters. So you have the clusters of the last 3 lights on the island. And there's the cluster around Hilton Head Plantation going up to Wilbourn. But the beauty of that system is that there are more possibilities with an adaptive management traffic system. It's an adaptive system. You can actually look at traffic density and regulate your traffic. And you could also tie in these 2 clusters together over, not for the entire day, but during your peak hours. And then the other thing that we have is that the beauty of the adaptive traffic system is that it produces a huge amount of data. You can pinpoint where the highest probabilities of accidents happening on the road by using that data appropriately. Now, then the question is, do we have the capability in-house to manage that, or do we need to have our traffic engineers in the town, Jim and Daryl, elevated to deal with these technical and software issues. So big data is important. It's important to lower your accidents. It's important for safety. It's important for reducing the number of accidents. The other safety aspect that I would like to see, and your opinion would be appreciated, is many places or highways have chevrons painted on the road. 80% of accidents, according to Sheriff Tanner, happen because people drive too close to each other. If you put chevrons on the road that show 2 chevrons between each car, it will reduce the number of traffic accidents. Not everybody will adhere to it, but it could definitely help. And then there may be these are things that, I'm not a traffic guy, but maybe there are other ways that we can make people drive slower on the bridge. Maybe it means having police activity stationed on the bridge or at rush hours. Maybe it means having a tow truck. I don't know what you see overall in traffic world, what people do, but I think suggestions from your side would be quite helpful. Yeah, but go ahead, Mike. I'll see what I've missed.
Okay, I've been saying over the past few meetings that we've had, I'd like to see the bridges widened, the existing bridges widened, and not consider an alternate bridge. Sean, you've said that it's already been determined that the existing bridges don't meet the requirements of seismic and blah, blah, blah. And that the cost of the new bridges is only a little bit more than the cost of rehabilitating and widening the existing ones. I don't see it that way, and I think I'd like to see Lockmuir consider that unless you already have. Have you looked into the existing bridges and whether or not they're capable of being widened for many reasons? And I tend to think that this seismic idea is just a way of, eliminating that possibility. I just can't believe that that's the answer. And in other words, not that I don't trust the county, but I just don't believe it.
That was one of the items one of the deliverables I mentioned in task 1 was coming up with our opinion on that. So the corridor analysis that Kate's we've went through, that is truly independent. Like yes, we have looked at other pieces of information, but it's our numbers, our data, everything else from start to finish. However, that was one item that Sean had asked that we look at and provide our professional opinion on based on what has been completed to date, that we would not go back and do any bridge redesigns or question the DOT's studies with that, just provide our professional opinion. So I started looking into that and looked at what previous consultant had presented to the to the town as a town preferred option. And with that option, that showed if it would work from a traffic operations standpoint, building just 2 eastbound bridges and then rehabilitating the westbound bridges. And for us, part of the delay in not providing that deliverables is because I feel we needed to be 100% sure with our growth rate and what the 2045 volumes needed to be able to speak to if a 2-lane eastbound bridge would work. And now we know for sure that it will not. With that study, they mentioned that some of the concerns were, in addition to capacity, that if the westbound bridges over Skull Creek and then the Mackey as well, that they could not meet seismic standards. So one of the feed.
Check into that though. Did you actually?
That's one we requested to get a copy of the seismic study from the Department of Transportation. The county didn't have a readily available copy of that. However, what I did ask them was when that statement is made, that the county representative let us know that they said that nothing could be done to retrofit it to meet current seismic standards. So when I called to ask the Department of Transportation to make sure that it's just a standard FOIA process to get that specific study, he let me know that it was. He has shared that statement is usually for one of 2 things. One, structurally or physically, it just cannot be done to meet current standards. Standards change over time, and nothing can be done. Or it's a factor of the cost to do that exceeds what it would be to build new. So it's one of those 2 things. So when we get the seismic study, we'll see. But when we look at the cross-section or the option that Sean presented to us to take a look at and provide our professional opinion, if it's just 2 lanes, we know that that's not going to work. And if it comes back that it cannot be done, either physically or structurally, or it costs more than to build new, then it seems that it may be unfeasible.
So you are doing that analysis then?
Correct.
Part of this, okay.
What's going to be a deliverable is a professional opinion commentary, not a redesign.
Oh, no.
It's
of
just going to
course.
be the level of what I just shared, just with some backup data that we've received from a previous seismic study,
Expect you to design a
or to speak to the seismic study that they did and question that. It's not, just like we questioned the growth rate, we dove into that.
Right.
And Sean didn't feel it was necessary for us to go into that level. But we have, yes, that's part of task 1.8. That was a deliverable that I've described that we'll be providing.
Yes, I've got two more things, and then I'm out of your hair. So one is that I put a lot of value into looking at a synchro modeling, yeah? And to do that in a meeting like this is quite difficult, especially when you want to play around with various thoughts, overpass, underpass, here, lights off. And I think what I would like to propose is that we have, at some point in time, a meeting with the Lochmuller guys that are doing the modeling, to be able to look at all these different elements that we can throw into it. I'd like to have that be considered.
What would that do to the cost? Right, between the town and Lochmuller?
Kate, if you could speak to, I know this is, speaking with Dietrich, he has a desire to see the simulations in person. I know that you shared in the past that from a virtual standpoint, showing it on the screen, having the simulation models running, great lag to occur. That's a fair statement?
Yeah, it's fair to say that there would be a pretty significant lag in doing that virtually. Also, while it may be, one or two clicks, so to speak, to get various alternative, changed in synchro, there's also like a lot of checking and quality control and moving around to various things that would need to be done during a live session such as that. Just to give you all an idea about how our team works, when I meet internally with my team, we talk about all these different ideas that we want to do, and then they have a task list to go update the models to do accordingly, and then we don't meet again for like 2 days because sometimes that's how long it takes to work through and get a model working correctly and make sure that the situation and parameters that we had checked for the prior situation still apply for this situation. And so I can certainly appreciate the idea and wanting to do that. But as far as the practicality of that, I'm just afraid it would be a lot of dead air space of everybody just kind of.
Sean, what is that overreaching?
Well, I mentioned before, and with consultation with Nate and their team, that I think we're oversimplifying the utility of the model to think it's just a quick toggle on and off. And if you toggle off something, that you're going to immediately see the impacts and benefit, or just impacts, I guess, of that. Not every option is built into the model to even be able to toggle on and off. And that's why this has been an iterative process to identify alternatives for alignment, looking at all 19, 20 plus that are out there. And then as they went, built the synchro model, and now in the more detailed VisSim model, they will get into evaluation of intersection options with that variability that they'll assess. So I want to make sure that the committee understands that it's not just get in a room and you add or subtract one element or component or different geometry, and then it happens immediately. And let me know if I'm speaking on a turn, but I'm trying to paraphrase previous conversations that capability and effectiveness just isn't there real time to do that at that pace.
John, okay. Alternatively, I can present you with all the thoughts I have. You may have other ideas, and you can play around with it without anybody, any of the general public, and come back to us with what your results have been. But I think, I think we have to have the attitude, for lack of a better word, to really see that stuff. And what I have seen, and I've really looked at quite a few traffic models, and alterations that you make are not that complicated. If you just take one static, if you take one, you don't have to take every alternative, but take an alternative that you like and put these things in. It's not that complicated, I'm telling you. Not as complicated.
I'm going to rely on Nate and his team to answer that.
I'll start, Kate, and if you want to chime in, if anything that I missed. But from an intersection standpoint, if you're familiar with synchro, sounds like you are, you can toggle and like change a lane, right? And it automatically on your visual, it shows an added lane. However, when you're talking about complicated, different corridor alignments, I mean, for example, one of the reasons for the elevated bypass, why you wouldn't want to show a sim traffic version of that, because there's limitations in it's like visually, like it doesn't look like it in the center, but in order for synchro to produce results that are accurate, it looks a little bit different. But when you're going on an intersection basis, yes, you can add a turn lane, but then whenever you start carrying it through, then to Kate's point, it takes a while to make sure that everything else downstream ties in appropriately, and then looking at the various inputs. And then when you get into sim traffic, there are also calibrations with that as well. So it is a lot longer than.
I'll leave it with you. I mean, I'll make my list of things. If you can add other things, play with it and show it next time at the next meeting, that'd be great. And I think also in general, for people's understanding, what happens when you do certain things. Very useful. And, at the end of the day, it will all make us support whatever we come up with, and it's a good thing. I'm not here on April 10, so that's my last point, Helen. I can be here virtually, but if there's a way that we can move the meeting to the 17th, that'd be great.
I know the 17th, that is not an option.
For another day.
Yeah. So we have to take a look at that. I know we tried to work in the 10th, so we'll see if we. Okay. Any other comments from the committee? Public comment. Fair.
Just a couple of quick ones. I sent you an email earlier today. Number one, I seriously think the forecasts are being understated. Seriously, I have to repeat that. I seriously think the forecasts are being understated. For example, you've got in 2045, 2,754 westbound people in 2045. Whereas according to county data, in 2018, we already had over 3,000. So I don't understand what's going to shrink the traffic. I think your model is good, but the numbers are wrong, and I also doubt the growth rate. And so the way to resolve that is just run the models for 3 growth rates, yours 0.56, the counties, and the intermediate. That's not changing a configuration, just running different numbers. And also, when you run the model, give us the results for, and I gave you the numbers this morning, 2,500, 3,000, 3,500, and 4,000 vehicles per hour. Because I think some of these early plans are going to break down completely. I think things like the bypass, and I don't really care what kind of bypass you use, a vertical, a horizontal, or diagonal. Doesn't matter to me. I think the vertical is harder on the people in Stony. The horizontal may require some environmental jiggering, but you built pickleball courts down there, you built a parking lot, you built a park, and you own lots of land. So there's ways through that. And I think what we're asking is we want to see both methods. We don't want an out-of-the-pocket decision here in the room. Show us a bypass or equivalent of a bypass, and show us the vertical and the horizontal, and show us the pane. The pane to Stony with the vertical, and some environmental purchase with the horizontal. Every time you build an airport or a terminal, you have huge environmental impacts. You pay for them. You do mitigation. You do environmental mitigation. You're going to burn 40 acres for this huge bridge and the bike path. So give us the numbers. It's not going to be hard. Tell us a number of acres of wetlands that are needed, and those that are really wetlands, because they're not. A lot of that is town land. It's got parking lots on it. It's got a pickleball court. Not all wetlands. And one last thing, look at the maps I sent you over the weekend. There's ways around using a flyover. There's a much cheaper way to start without the flyover. Look at that map. And also consider the local connection road between Spanish Wells Road and Chamberlain. That actually came up in the MKS case study. It was a good idea. I think they had a way to get around the environmental issues also. So in the end, I think the bypass idea, whatever way you use, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, circles, doesn't matter. Bypassing those two traffic lights is going to be very important, and getting the express traffic that wants to go to Sea Pines out of Stony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, sir.
Do you mind if I go after this man?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Let you go.
Christopher Cliff. I'd like to address a question to Sean, if I may. Sean, at the beginning of the meeting, you mentioned a couple of ancillary things going on. Recently, the chairman of Sea Pines Community Service Associates has referred to interaction they're having with the town regarding the Palmetto Bay Road and the Circle. And we've heard today various alternatives discussed. And one consequence of speeding traffic through the bridge and the Cross Island Parkway is impact on the Circle. Could you comment, please, on the interactions you're having with Sea Pine CSA? And I believe you have some consultants, and whether or not you're going to dovetail in with Lockmiller?
Yeah, so if
Thank
we
you.
can, on that, if we can answer after
Sorry.
public comment, yeah, just because there might be some other questions that we can answer at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoagland?
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Your service is appreciated. Mr. Perry, you are a mortgage broker, and many who sit on this dais or committee get a false sense of knowledge over the professionals who address you from the podium. This corridor project must be decided by honest professionals and not politicians, lawyers involved, nor, and this should include special interest groups like the Chamber, the Secret Greater Island Council, and no one cares about opinions from non-professionals. Only a group of professionals that can come to a total or majority decision on how to proceed and end the ongoing delayed process. This is a perfect example of a government bureaucracy where final decisions are delayed over and over. Let's just give the full power and final decisions to the professionals, and any non-professionals on this committee are replaced. What are the qualifications of this committee? Mr. Perry, you for one are a mortgage broker and should not even get a say and replaced with a qualified professional. Willie Young, I've known for years. He's a nice guy, but he's in the upholstery business. Worse, no doubt, Perry is only on this committee to represent special interests and already proven this and also proved his dishonesty. For the special interest groups, he does not even qualify for a mayor. Lastly, how does Perry chair an advisory committee versus a professional? And how does and can an advisory committee made up of non-professionals advise on anything they don't know about or understand? Let's put 5 professionals on this advisory committee made up of engineers, designers, trained for roads, bridges, and all the other aspects of this project to get this completed. Do we have any engineers for roads and bridges or any aspect of this project on this committee? Perry, I see that you're one. I looked you up, and I'm glad I did not look you up. I was trying, but I couldn't get you. No. I said, no, I didn't say that. I said some. Please, I said some. If you're an engineer, then you should be on this committee. I'm saying that the non-engineers or people that are not qualified should not be on this committee. So don't take that personal. I think you are, if you're an
Mr.
engineer,
Hoagland,
congratulations.
continue.
I have nothing else to say.
Thank you for your comments. Any other public comments? Connor?
Melinda Tenner. So there was a lot to consume and digest today with all the materials, and I appreciate the amount of detail and work that went into this. One of the things that I'm interested in trying to understand, and because I didn't have access to the information ahead of time, is how long are these benefits going to last? You know, when you look at the comparisons that you're using, you've got current state, and then you've got the current, you know, and then forecasted for 2045, and all the alternatives compared to that 2045 number. I'd also be interested to look at how does it compare to today? Meaning that when you put all this in there and you spend all this money, are we going to be in the same place and position that we're in today? Is it going to be better or is it going to be worse? And I couldn't tell from the material, but I think that would be an interesting thing to know. And then I know that the clock is ticking for municipal consent. And I'm just wondering what all the public activities are going to be between then and now. I know you're talking about another meeting of the committee, either the 10th or the 17th or another date. I saw that you are putting out there a public open house, at least in the presentation. It talked about that, which I think would be a very important thing to do. And then you have all of the work associated with the Gullah Geechee community in determining all the mitigation impacts that'll be needed and agreed upon before you give municipal consent. So I'm just worried about the timeline between then and now and getting all of that completed. Thank you.
Other public comments? Mr. Gray.
I had Grace Smith, Indigo Run, Hilton Head Island. I had 3 prepared points, but I'm only going to make the first one, and then I'm going to segue into some observations I had and questions I had based on those incredible videos. First point, looking at the consultant's results for the 2045 SCDOT Modified Recommended Preferred Alternative, it becomes eminently clear as to why that alternative should be summarily discarded. It spends close to $250 million of our taxpayer money to shorten the morning eastbound commute by less than 2 minutes. And it shortens the afternoon westbound commute by a stellar 4.5 minutes. Furthermore, I recall SCDOT itself stating that the best possible outcome they could expect after spending the aforementioned $250 million would be an upgrade in the peak traffic rating from an F to a D. The minuscule benefit derived for the millions and millions of dollars expended, to say nothing of the 5 years of the construction that the residents and visitors alike would be forced to endure, make the SCDOT proposal untenable to the point of absurdity. Okay, second, in response to the videos, the 2045 AM shows that most of the congestion is at the merge from the Hilton Parkway merging prior to the bridges. And then over the bridges, it's pretty clear sailing. And then more congestion happens as we get to the place that we know all the problems are, those traffic lights. Then I looked at the video of the PM departure time, and there's a lot of congestion before those lights. And then once you get past Squire Pope Light, there's clear sailing over the bridges. So what the hell are we spending, first of all, devastating the ecological and aesthetic approach to Hilton Head Island by building this single slab, 130-foot aircraft carrier deck looking monstrosity of a bridge when your simulations show that the bridges are not the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Barnwell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and committee, for your service as volunteers to try to improve the traffic conditions on Hilton Head. My name for the record is Thomas Barnwell Jr. I am a native of Hilton Head, and I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to question any of the technical things. I have lived here for a long time, and I was here when the boat hit the swing bridge many years ago, which was quite an inconvenience for businesses as well as individual residents, along with the vacationers on this island. Therefore, listening to you with my hearing aid, I don't hear very well, I would like to congratulate the committee members that spend hours evaluating all the details that I saw you flipping through while you were sitting here today. And among those, I heard of the studies that was done. I would hope that the consultants that's doing the studies zero their time frame regarding the studies in the mornings between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. and in the evenings between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. specifically. And the reason I'm saying that is that I have personally traveled the highways during those times, coming on the island and going off the island. For example, this morning, I went out off the island at 6:30, had a 7:30 appointment at O.C. Welch, Ford. I was able to get off the island, out of Squire Pope Road. When I got to O.C. Welch, it took me about 8 minutes before I could make the left turn off 278 to get into the service place. I timed it. I mean, there was a straight stream of traffic that far out, and I know my time is up. Okay, very quickly. The other thing I would like to suggest, please consider that second alternative bridge off and on the island. The last one is there's a desperate need to really consider above the ground elevated highway from the existing bridge, doing a connector to the Cross Island Parkway. However that can be done, it will really alleviate the problems in Stony. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
For the record, my name is Richard Busy. I live in Indigo Run. So, Mr. Mayor, no stone unturned. Really? Sounds like hyperbole to me. Now, we had lots of charts, lots of data today, but I'm not convinced personally that our high-priced consultants, who are going to be making more than $400,000 of taxpayers' money, have explored all options to solve our traffic congestion issues and looked at fresh new ideas. It seems to be that what I heard today were relatively minor tweaks to the county plan, which we know will not work. But you, Mr. Mayor, have not helped. At this committee meeting last month, a motion was properly made by Mr. Advocate regarding minimizing the impact of the corridor project on the Stony community. The motion was seconded by Mr. Young, but you, acting as chairman, even though you were never elected chairman of this committee, you refused to allow any debate or discussion on the motion. Clear violation of Robert's Rules of Order, and you know it. Another motion was made, again by Mr. Advocate, concerning a second bridge. And again, before anyone could make a second to that motion, you shut it down. Another violation of Robert's Rules of Order, which govern this committee. Shame on you. You know better. And you did it again today with Mr. Advocate. He tried to make a motion to direct the consultants to study Mr. Bayer's bypass plan. You didn't even ask for a second. You deferred to your staff member and avoided the question. And we learned today, think about it, we could have a second bridge. Mr. Barnwell talked about the need for a second bridge. We could have it in 40 years because the consultants said, well, it's going to take 20 years, so don't even think of it now. Yeah, we'll think about it maybe in 20 years and then 20 years to build it so you can have a second bridge in 40 years. We need a fair, transparent, and independent analysis, independent of all political manipulation. And the town holds the trump card in being able to withhold municipal consent, and we should not move forward without a proper plan. The town should not provide municipal consent until we have a plan that is proven to meet our needs and is fully vetted in public. And I know that there are those, the mayor being one, who says, let's move forward. We've waited long enough, but let's get it right. And don't be fooled into thinking that somehow we're going to lose our state funding if we don't grant municipal consent. Hilton Head is a cash cow, and Hilton Head, or funding rather, will be available when the town decides it has a plan that it approves of. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other cuts? All right, seeing none. Oh, okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Yolanda Cohen-McKinney, and just want to say this for the record that I am in 100% agreement with Mr. Beer's alternative route, and what Mr. Barnwell stated as well. We should be open to the opinions of the citizens, particularly the Native Islanders. And we have, like I stated previously, we have given a lot. We have lost a lot of land, and we don't want to lose any more. And improvements can be had. It can be accomplished without us losing our land, be negatively impacted. And we are being negatively impacted by the preferred plan that was shared. And we shouldn't lose any more structures, any more land. And for one, Mr. Young, his upholstery shop is on 278. And prior to him owning that, that was Mr. Alec Patterson's store, right, Mama? Built in 1954 before the bridge. So that's a part of our community. And many people may not understand that, but it's a part of the Native Islanders community, our business community back then, and we still relish it, and we just don't want it touched. So improvement, yes, but do it in such a way where there's some morality and some ethics involved in this. You're talking about Native Islanders, gullies. There's not much land left in our community. And by God, at least take that to heart. We don't want to lose any more. We've lost enough. You know, we've said this again and again, and it's known that we're dwindling here. So to take more from us at this point will be wrong. So I ask that each and every one of you take that in consideration. I know you have your independent study going on here, but it's a matter of the heart as well. So please do the right thing and not impact the Gullah Geechee community.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none. So Sean, I'll let you respond to the question from earlier.
So there's a few efforts that will all merge related to evaluation of other intersections, including the Sea Pine Circle. So this effort deliberately was extended to a real end-to-end to look on the business route to Hooping Crane and Indigo Run, but on the Cross Island route all the way to Sea Pine Circle. And so once Lockmuir in this work has moved through this task 3, when they get into task 4, they'll be looking at all the intersections further downstream. Right now, they're looking just a gum tree to make sure that there's information provided related to the primary project. We also have a major thoroughfares corridor plan that MKSK, Kimley Horn, Tool are all working together in a big team to deliver a plan for the entirety of William Hilton Parkway, the different segments, Palmetto Bay Road, Pope Avenue, New Orleans, Arrow, but Sea Pine Circle is part of that evaluation as well. And we've been talking with members from CSA and Sea Pines about the Sea Pine Circle. We've engaged a consultant through Kimley Horn to focus specifically on the Sea Pine Circle again. So 4 separate engagements that'll help provide some opportunity for improvements in that area. And I understand that Sea Pines is working to secure that same consultant to evaluate Greenwood Drive and access management through there. So all 4 of those efforts are currently in motion and should give us the adequate information to understand what options are available for improvements in that area. So,
Thanks, Sean. Sean, very quickly, if I may, do you have a time frame in mind?
So we're about to get back to you on that. So we have a corridors plan that's scheduled for a workshop next month.
Okay.
But town council asked us to focus in on some priority segments, including the area known primarily as Northridge,
Yeah.
because of some safety concerns there, along with segment 2, which is Gumtree Road to Beach City Road and Main Street, because we want to advance now that we own the entirety of Main Street, advance some improvements in that. So it would be subsequent to that discussion.
You mentioned MKSK and Kimberly Horn. Who's the third consultant group?
Tool is a leader in multimodal design pathways, and I can certainly talk with you after the meeting to go through that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you all for coming out today. Appreciate everybody's input and giving us about 3 hours today, so thank you all.